You can't understand, we be like.
Ask me the question. You said, what is my most favorite possession? And I would say God, because if you took the jury away from me, the cause, the education, everything, if I had God.
Mase was once the brightest face of Bad Boy, a rapper who sold massive records, hit songs dominating the radio, money, fame. For a time, he stood exactly where every rapper dreams of being. But there is something strange. When people talk about the GOATs of hip-hop, Mase's name never comes up. Not because he failed, not because he was unknown, but because hip-hop never truly respected Mase. So what happened? Why did someone who once stood at the top, once seen as the replacement face of Bad Boy, end up pushed to the margins of hip-hop history? Why is Mase never placed next to the real icons? Was it because he walked away from hip-hop to become a pastor? Was it because he was only a replacement, never a leader? This is not the story of a rapper who was hated. This is the story of a rapper, not recognized by history. And when you understand the real reason hip-hop turned its back on Mase, you will realize that some failures are not about numbers, but about respect. Was Mase just Biggie's stand-in? March 9, 1997, Christopher Wallace, known as the Notorious B.I.G., was shot and killed in Los Angeles. 6 bullets, one night after a party. A case that to this day still has no final answer. But Biggie's death was not just a personal tragedy. It was a seismic shock to hip-hop, especially to Bad Boy Records. Biggie was not just Bad Boy's #1 artist. He was its backbone. He was proof of the street credibility of an empire that was drifting further away from the streets. Biggie was what allowed Puff Daddy to stand inside hip-hop without being seen as just an entertainment mogul. When Biggie was alive, Bad Boy carried weight. When Biggie died, that weight vanished overnight. Puff was pushed into a dangerous position, not financially, but in legitimacy. Hip-hop is a culture that does not forgive power vacuums. If you do not fill that space, someone else will. And the question facing Puff at that moment was not, how do we find another Biggie? Because that was impossible. The real question was, how does Bad Boy survive without being swallowed by Biggie's shadow? Harlem murder Mase and a path, unlike Biggie Mason. Darrell Betha was born in 1975 in Jacksonville, Florida, but raised in Harlem, New York. In his early years, he was known as Murda Mase, a rapper with a far more aggressive image than the version the public would later come to know. In the late 1990s, Harlem was both a creative hub and a brutal proving ground. Cameron Big L Bloodshed and many other names were competing fiercely for position. In that environment, Mase did not stand out for being dangerous, but for being smooth. His flow was easy to listen to. His delivery was calm, not overly sharp, not forcing listeners to hold their breath. At first, this kept Mase from being seen as a true street rapper. But after Biggie's death, those same traits suddenly made him the ideal choice in Puff's eyes. Puff needed a successor, but not a king. After Biggie, Puff faced a paradox. He needed a new face big enough to carry Bad Boy forward, but he could not allow the creation of a second Biggie. Because a new Biggie would not only take the spotlight, it could also challenge power. And by that point, Puff was no longer just a producer behind the scenes. He was the center of Bad Boy, the brand, the boss. Mase solved that problem perfectly. He did not look too dangerous. He did not carry a heavy past. He did not bring stories that made radio or MTV nervous. Most importantly, Mase did not have the aura of someone who could overthrow Puff. From Murda Mase to Mase, a calculated transformation. When he joined Bad Boy, Murda Mase disappeared. In his place was Mase, cleaner, brighter, and easier to consume. The street image was softened. The lyrics became less violent. The flow was refined to fit radio. The album Harlem World was released in 1997, just over 7 months after Biggie's death. That timing was not accidental. Bad Boy needed to prove they were still alive, still selling records, still dominating the charts. And the album was a major success. In its first week, Harlem World debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200. It sold around 270,000 copies in its opening week, a massive number for the late 1990s, especially for a very young solo artist. Mase went straight to the top. In the United States alone, Harlem World was later certified 4-wax platinum by the RIAA, meaning over 4 million copies sold. Worldwide estimates pushed past 5 million. Throughout 1998, Mase's image appeared constantly on MTV, BET, and national music programs. When Harlem World was released, Mase was only 22 years old. 22. Number 1 debut album. Over 4 million sold in the US. A top 5 Billboard Hot 100 single. Very few rappers in history achieved this at that age. Commercially, Mase won completely. But here is the problem. Hip-hop does not judge rappers by sales alone. Nas never sold like Mase at that point. DMX did not need MTV to create impact. Jay-Z took years to reach similar commercial heights. But they were respected because their rise was believed to be real. With Mase, one question always hovered. If Biggie had not died, would Harlem World exist in this form? No one said it out loud. But in hip-hop, once a question exists, respect has already begun to erode. That success was too perfect, too fast, too carefully arranged, and it quietly pushed Mase into being seen as a product of the post-Biggie moment, rather than the architect of a new era. And that was the paradox that opened the entire tragedy of Mase. In hip-hop, he won on the charts, but lost in the culture. By late 1998 and early 1999, Mase stood where most rappers only dream of standing. But then one day, Mase suddenly disappeared. No warning, no major scandal, no failed album. The move that sparked outrage. When Mase walked away from rap to become a pastor. In 1999, right as Bad Boy was preparing for the next phase of its empire, Mase announced that he was stepping away from rap to follow a religious path. He said he had found God. He said rap no longer aligned with his new faith. He said he needed a different life. And for hip-hop, it was a shock. In the world of street lyricism, an artist finding faith is not unusual. Snoop Dogg explored reggae and gospel. Kanye West would later release Jesus is King. But this case was different. Hip-hop did not see this turn as a noble spiritual awakening. They saw it as a desertion. Through the eyes of industry veterans, Mase did not turn to God out of love, but because he could not handle the pressure. Hip-hop at the top is a survival game. It demands constant alertness, facing enemies who are always waiting to take you down and maintaining an image of invincibility. People whispered, "He's scared." Scared he could not escape the shadow of his own previous album. Scared of threats from the streets. Scared of legal trouble closing in. Scared that the show business machine would swallow his soul if he stayed. Becoming a pastor was seen as a shield, a way to retreat safely, without being labeled a commercial failure. The unwritten rules of the hip-hop battlefield. Hip-hop follows an unwritten code. Brutal and unforgiving. You do not leave the battlefield until you are defeated. In rap battle culture, if you are winning, you keep dominating. If you are losing, you fight until you regain your respect. Walking away at the peak of success is viewed as a betrayal of the culture that fed you. For rappers who came from nothing, hip-hop is often the only voice they have. Abandoning it at the height of glory feels like a slap in the face to those still fighting every day, just to reach that position. It was seen as weakness, as hiding behind faith to escape the fight. But what made things worse was not just that Mase left rap, it was how he left. The way he left that enraged hip-hop. At the end of 1999, Mase did not fade away quietly. He stepped directly in front of the media and said something no rapper dared to say at the time. He left rap because rap was the wrong path. Not a break, not trying something new, but a rejection of the very culture that took him to the top. In his earliest interviews after leaving Bad Boy, Mase described hip-hop as a toxic environment filled with temptation, violence, and wrongdoing. He said rap had pulled him away from his faith and from who he truly was. He framed his exit as a liberation. To the mainstream public, it was a fascinating story. To hip-hop, it was a slap across the face. Because in this culture, there is a clear line. You can leave, but you do not turn around and call the place that built you a mistake. Before, Mase rappers had spoken about faith, but they did it differently. They did not place themselves above the culture that created them. Mase did. He spoke from the position of someone who had awakened, looking back at hip-hop as something dark, inferior, something to escape. His words carried judgment. Not judgment of himself, but of an entire world. Hip-hop did not hear humility. It heard denial from someone who had already taken everything rap had to give. He sold millions through rap. He gained money, fame, and influence through rap. And then he said rap was wrong. To hip-hop, that was not faith. That was ingratitude. What made it even harder to accept was the timing of Mase's exit. He had not been dissed. He had not been pushed out. He had not failed commercially. On the contrary, he left while the heat was still there, while his name was still on the radio, while Bad Boy still needed him to hold its post-Biggie position. And in hip-hop, leaving the battlefield before being defeated is seen as running away. Becoming a pastor so fast, it raised eyebrows. After leaving rap, Mase entered the religious path at a speed that made many people suspicious. He began studying theology, preaching, and within a short time was ordained as a pastor. He became known as Pastor Mason Betha. Instead of joining an established church, he quickly founded his own called El Elyon International Church in Atlanta. This was not a symbolic media-driven church, but a real religious community where Mase served as pastor and spiritual leader for his congregation, many of whom first knew him through his music. This made Mase a rare case in hip-hop, a rapper who did not just say he had found God, but actually lived for years as a pastor. Pastor Mason Betha's sermons quickly became a media focal point, but anyone expecting a quiet traditional setting was disappointed. Mase's church carried the DNA of a full-scale entertainment superstar, massive sound systems, professionally designed stage lighting, high-end cameras constantly moving to capture every moment. Thousands of people attended not because they were seeking deep theological wisdom, but because many were young fans who knew every one of his rap lyrics by heart. They came to see what a holy version of Mase looked like in action. In hip-hop, there is an unwritten rule that everyone in the game understands: if you leave completely. But if you leave for morality, for enlightenment, for a higher path, then when you come back, you no longer have the right to stand on the same stage as before. And that was Mase's biggest mistake. Returning to rap, Mase's greatest error. Around 2004, after 5 years of serving God, the microphone called him back. Mase began appearing in studios again. He reunited with Cameron and resurfaced around the Welcome Back era. But instead of warm celebration, he was met with skeptical looks. The timing mattered. Hip-hop was no longer 1997. Biggie had become legend. Bad Boy was no longer the undisputed center of power. The game now belonged to 50 Cent to Jay-Z at the height of his dominance to Kanye West, opening an entirely new lane. Mase walked into a hip-hop that no longer needed him. When Mase returned, the culture's first question was not can he still rap? It was, who is he now? He still called himself a pastor. He still spoke about faith. Yet he rapped familiar hip-hop themes. He was no longer a pure rapper, but he was no longer a pastor removed from the spotlight either. He stood in between. And in hip-hop, standing in between is the most dangerous position of all. This return also came without a major statement project. No serious solo album. No clear musical manifesto. No decisive move strong enough to force hip-hop to pay attention. Instead, there were scattered verses, nostalgic appearances, and reunions that reminded people of the 1990s. In the eyes of the culture, this was not a comeback. It was testing the waters. A few years later, Mase disappeared again. No major explanation. No official announcement. He returned to his role as a pastor, focusing on his church and religious life. At that point, his image in hip-hop began to freeze. Mase was no longer seen as someone who came back, but failed, but as someone who drifted in and out of the game at will. Hip-hop can forgive failure, but it does not accept hesitation. In this culture, identity is everything. Jay-Z has always been clear about who he is, even as he evolves. Nas has remained the storyteller of the streets. DMX embodied pain and inner conflict. Kanye is the disruptor. Each has a clear place in history. Mase does not. By the time Mase truly wanted to return to rap seriously, it was too late. New audiences had no emotional memory of him. Older audiences had already moved on. His return did not feel like a legend coming back. It felt like someone trying to reclaim a place that had already drifted away. Mase's biggest mistake was not leaving rap. His biggest mistake was never being decisive. He left, but not completely. He returned, but not fully committed. And most importantly, he never clearly answered the question. Hip-hop always asks, who are you in this culture? In hip-hop, if you cannot define your own identity, the culture will do it for you. And in Mase's case, the answer hip-hop delivered was silence. In every story about Mase, no matter where he is, what he does, whether he disappears or returns, there is always one name hanging behind him like a shadow that never leaves Sean Diddy Combs. Diddy Mase never escaped the shadow. From the moment Mase stepped into the spotlight in 1997, hip-hop never viewed him as an independent artist. Unlike Biggie, Nas, or Jay-Z, the story around Mase was never a personal journey. It was always the story of Bad Boy of Puff Daddy after Biggie of a strategy to revive an empire. Mase was rarely mentioned without Diddy's name attached. Even his musical style was tightly linked to Puff. His biggest hits all carried Diddy's fingerprints, the production, the ad-libs, the imagery of extravagant parties. In the videos, Puff appeared side by side, sometimes even more prominent than the main artist. In the eyes of hip-hop, Mase was not leading an era. He was presented as the face of an era that had already been designed. After leaving rap, and especially when he later spoke about the past, Mase began to hint at what he saw as the darker side of his relationship with Diddy. Not through direct confrontation, but through scattered half-spoken comments stretched over many years. Mase repeatedly said that he did not own his own music. He publicly stated that to buy back his catalog, the recordings that built his name, he had to pay a large sum to Bad Boy. The exact number was not always clearly disclosed, but the message remained consistent. Mase felt stripped of control over the results of his labor. He also implied that when he was very young, he did not fully understand what he was signing. That is not uncommon in the music industry, especially for black artists in the 1990s. But for hip-hop, the issue was not that Mase signed a bad deal. It was that he accepted it in silence while benefiting the most and only spoke up after he had stepped away from the center of power. Mase talked about being forced to work non-stop, having his image exploited, being pulled into a machine he did not control. He described himself as a tool inside something much bigger. To audiences outside hip-hop, this sounded like a familiar story of exploitation in the entertainment industry. But hip-hop reacted differently. This culture does not deny exploitation, but it judges people by how they respond to it. Why didn't you stand up earlier? That question haunts Mase's entire story. Hip-hop does not ask it to blame him, but to place him in history. When Biggie was alive, when Harlem World was dominating the charts, when Mase had money, fame, and influence, he did not challenge Diddy. He did not publicly fight for ownership. He did not try to step out of Bad Boy's shadow. Instead, he left through religion, leaving conflicts unresolved. And only many years later, from the sidelines, did he begin to speak about money contracts and control. In hip-hop, that is seen as speaking too late. Jay-Z was once bound by the system, but he broke it while still at the top. Nas was once dismissed by the industry, but he stayed and proved himself through music. These artists are respected, not because they were never exploited, but because they confronted it while they still carried weight. Mase did not. The shadow of Diddy and the tragedy of being late. Because he spoke up too late, Mase never escaped Diddy's shadow, even when positioning himself as a victim. His story was not read by hip-hop as an oppressed artist standing up, but as another chapter in the long chain of conflicts surrounding Puff Daddy. The most painful truth is this: Mase was not wrong about control and injustice. But in hip-hop, being right is not enough. You have to be right at the right time. When Mase finally told his story, the power was no longer in his hands. And when power is gone, words lose weight. Hip-hop does not pity those who fail to stand up early, not out of cruelty, but because this culture is built on one principle: you have to claim your place, yourself. Mase was never seen as an independent artist. Diddy shaped him when he was young. And when Mase tried to reshape that image, it was already too late. He is not remembered as a traitor or a failure. He is remembered as a major talent who let someone else hold the wheel for too long. And that is why, even though many details he shared were true, hip-hop does not offer him sympathy. Because in this culture, if you do not stand up at the right moment, history will not stand with you. Mase can blame Diddy for the shadow that weighed down his career, but hip-hop does not care who you blame. It asks only one thing: do you still have the standing to check someone else? And that question exploded most clearly not in a bad boy boardroom, but on the airwaves of Hot 97. When Mase checked Jim Jones, but exposed his own weakness. It was a broadcast on Hot 97 in New York at a time when Dipset was rising fast and Jim Jones was starting to appear constantly on the radio. He spoke about Harlem as if he were an inseparable part of its history. At that moment, Harlem was not just a location, it was credibility. It was the right to speak. Mase came on air with his familiar presence, calm, composed, no need to posture. He did not come to start a beef. But when the conversation turned to Harlem Dipset and each person's role in the neighborhood's history, the atmosphere began to shift. Jim Jones's name came up. Mase did not interrupt. He did not talk over anyone. He waited for the right moment. Then he spoke, and every word landed heavy. He said Jim Jones did not grow up with them, was not there in the early years, did not come up during the time when Harlem had no lights, no reputation yet. Mase paused for a brief second, then dropped the line that froze the room. He's a fan. In New York, hip-hop culture calling a rapper a fan is not an insult. It is more dangerous than that. It says you do not belong to this story, you are watching it from the outside. In that moment, if Cameron had said it, the room would have exploded. If it came from someone active still fully in the game, the reaction would have been different. But this was Mase. A man who once stood at the top, and also a man who had walked away. Mase was right. But he spoke from the position of someone who had left the battlefield, someone who was not there when the pressure peaked, someone who chose a different exit before hip-hop had the chance to strike back. And hip-hop does not allow those who leave to return as referees. That Hot 97 moment became a double-edged blade. It did not take down Jim Jones, but it cut deep into Mase himself. It reminded all of New York of one thing: he stepped out of the game when it started to get hard. No one dissed Mase afterward. No one dragged his name. No one extended the beef. It was just that no one stood with him. And in hip-hop, there is no colder verdict than standing alone after telling the truth. Hot 97 did not destroy Mase, but it froze him in a brutal position. A man who was right, but no longer had the culture standing behind him. That was the moment people realized Mase was not hated. He was simply no longer trusted. For those who wonder, what is Mase doing? Today, Mase remains an active figure in hip-hop culture and media, but his life has changed dramatically since leaving Bad Boy Records in the late 1990s. In the 2020s, Mase began reshaping himself through a very different lane. Alongside Cameron and Treasure Stat Baby Wilson, Mase became a co-host of the podcast It Is What It Is. On the surface, it appears to be a show about sports and basketball. But over time, it became a space where Mase showed a different side of himself. More everyday, more humorous, speaking casually, sometimes even poking fun at his own past. For many fans, this was the first time they saw Mase not as a rapper and not as a pastor, but as a seasoned middle-aged man, comfortable talking about life. At the same time, Mase's music began resurfacing in an unexpected way. In 2025, he confirmed that he was preparing to release a new album, his first full music project in more than 20 years. What made this announcement stand out was not just the comeback, but the timing. Mase openly said he wanted to release the album on the exact day Diddy's court trial was set to begin. To many, this did not feel random, but symbolic and deeply personal, tied to his complicated history with his former bad boy boss. Outside the spotlight, Mase's current life is relatively private. Some sources say he now lives in Los Angeles, unlike his earlier years as a pastor in Atlanta. In his personal life, Mase married Twyla Betha in 2001 and divorced in 2014. They share 2 children, and after the divorce, Mase chose to keep his family life largely private, rarely speaking about it in depth. Still, he occasionally reveals small personal moments, such as at ComplexCon 2025, where he joked about wedding rings and expectations, in love with a tone far lighter than his earlier, more guarded image. Approaching 50, Mase is no longer the young bad boy rapper and no longer just a pastor. He is a blend of roles: a once massively successful artist, a spiritual guide, a podcaster, and a media figure living between past and present. He is both inside hip-hop and outside of it, carrying an old legacy while trying to write a new chapter on his own terms. What stands out most about Mase today is that he no longer seems eager to prove anything. He is not chasing GOAT status. He is not grabbing headlines through scandal. Instead, he appears when he says what he wants and prepares to return to music at his own pace. Mase in 2025 does not live in the shadow of Harlem World. He is not only a pastor and not only a rapper. He is a man who has lived through many choices carrying both success and controversy, and whose story is still not fully closed. And perhaps the next return will show this Mase is not trying to be forgiven by hip-hop. He is simply finishing the part of his story he never had the chance to tell.
All data, analysis, and commentary in this video are presented based on information available at the time of production. The content is subject to change over time and should not be considered a definitive forecast. There is still so much more to explore: stories of resilience, legacy, and truth. Feel free to dive into some of our top recommended videos now appearing on your screen.